It is now time for our scripture reading. And my scripture today, excuse me, is the 133rd Psalm. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. Thus ends the reading of our scripture, the 133rd Psalm. Our scripture lesson today speaks about how wonderful life is when people live together in unity. We live in a time where we frequently hear people speaking about the polarization in our country. Some people's opinions and ideals are at far opposite ends of the spectrum, to the far right or to the far left. Our lesson today helps us navigate through this and to be an advocate for unity. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. What is unity? Unity is defined as the state of being united or joined as a whole. As a whole. It is when we find common ground. There are some people who prefer division. They seek to divide, to impose their will on people. There's an old saying, if you want to win the war, the strategy is to divide and conquer. And why is that? Because as a whole, we are stronger. And when we are divided, we are weaker. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the concept of disinformation, fake news, and alternate realities have become buzzwords and unfortunately more prevalent. If the truth is uncomfortable, or if it doesn't fit in with our agenda, we can simply say it's not real. It's fake news. And what is most troublesome is that people actually believe what is being fed to them. Now, I don't know if people believe this, but as an example, at a recent UN conference, the UN ambassador for Russia actually claimed that the atrocities and war crimes against the citizens of Ukraine were staged. I won't comment anymore on that. Sadly, it is the state of affairs and indicative of what is going on in the world and in our own country. Okay, so by now you're wondering, this is awfully depressing. Where could you possibly be going with this, Reverend Pam? Well, I was led to speak about this because it is the reality of the world we live in. We can't run from it and hide our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. But what we can do is we can determine how we are going to react, and what actions we take. One approach is to put it in the light. By shining the light on a situation, we work to bring understanding. Darkness represents ignorance, and light represents understanding. So our goal is to shine that brilliant, brilliant light of God on a situation and to take it to a higher level and bring understanding. The Hermetic philosophy, an ancient teaching predating the Bible, teaches us about the principle of polarity. It says, everything is dual. Everything has poles. I'll repeat that. Everything is dual and everything has poles. Now, one example of this to illustrate this principle are the extremes of hot and cold water. At one end of the spectrum, there's this freezing cold water, and at the other end, scalding hot. At their furthest extreme, either would cause severe damage if we were to touch them. What's interesting is they are both on the same plane of existence. They are a part of each other, but they are expressed at different degrees. You can kind of liken this to the polarization in our society. To temper the freezing cold, what do? We blend in a little bit of the hot and we move it over. And to temper the scalding hot, we blend in a little bit of the cold and we move it over. And we begin to temper the extremes. We blend the two together until we reach the optimal, comfortable state. The same can be said about our society. We are all children of God, and we exist on the same plane of consciousness. Now, I'm aware that is an allness statement, which I refrain from using, but in this case, I can actually say and use an allness statement that we are all children of God. Either extreme on this plane of consciousness, it can be too much of one or too much of another. The goal is to blend them together so we find the most optimal state. Here's where we come in and how we can be a part of the solution by living by example, striving to rest our consciousness in a tempered state, and then inspiring others to do the same, shining our light on a situation and working to blend a little bit more of the hot or a little bit more of the cold until we find the balance. Speaking words and taking actions that will promote unity rather than division. And yes, as tough as it may be at times, even having to hold our tongue. Unfortunately, we can't hide from it. There is an election in a few weeks, and the TV is loaded with campaign ads. But I guess you can if you don't turn on your TV. A friend shared a post that was on Facebook. It said, people are actually looking forward to watching car ads again in place of all of these political ads. I, for one, am really looking forward to watching the car ads again. So as I thought about all of this, as I was walking one day, because that's where I do some of my deep thinking, it came to me. It came to me that when we blend blue and red, we create purple. And purple is a high vibrational color. It is a high spiritual color. It is the color of the crown chakra. Perhaps instead of digging our heels in and focusing on polarization, we can focus on our commonalities and strive to blend together, to create a higher vibration in the world, to blend red and blue, to create purple, as much as we may want to be. It's not always about being right. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing. Perhaps we can keep an open mind and listen to another viewpoint instead of judging whether they are right or wrong. We can accept it as their opinion and then strive to find our commonalities. As our opening hymn says, weaving us together in unity and love. We are much, much stronger as a society and as a country when we work together and we are united as a whole. Look at what's happening in Iran. Men and women are uniting together to stand up against the oppressiveness against women in their country. It is also important to be mindful to remain in this higher vibrational state of consciousness when we are dealing with these situations, to stay grounded and remain in the spiritual energy. And one way we can do this is by practicing non-attachment, by not taking what is happening outside and around us deeply within us. Doesn't mean that we don't care or that we are putting our head in the sand. Rather, we are becoming actively involved in the solution rather than taking it all into us. We are sending healing and prayers to uplift society without taking on all the problems of the world. Because when we take on all the problems of the world, it weighs us down and it lowers our vibrations. And that doesn't help us solve anything. When we practice non-attachment, we are mastering the principle of polarity. And that is the goal, or I should say one of the goals of the Hermetic philosophy, to master the principles and rest at that point where we live intentionally. Here, we are consciously keeping ourselves in a calm and peaceful state by not allowing these situations to upset us or make us angry. Remaining in that resting state without going to the extremes. Non-attachment enables us to live in this world without the world overcoming us. And it helps us to stay at the top of the mountain. Now, I'm going to take all of this that we've spoken about, and I'm going to tie it together with a metaphysical interpretation of our scripture. The 133rd Psalm is a song of David. David represents divine love in human consciousness, the idea of perfect unity in all existence. This is the song of divine love in us, striving to create unity and harmony. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. Aaron was the brother of Moses, and he was the first high priest. He represents the ruling principle of our intellect. And after Moses led his people out of bondage, he went up into the high mountain. He went up into that highest state of consciousness where he communed with God. Aaron remained with the people, and while he waited for Moses to return, Aaron succumbed to the physical will. Instead of remaining faithful and committed, he let the world control his intellect, and he created the molten calf, the false idol. The idol symbolized the false thoughts we may have when we don't follow spiritual ideals. This is the tug of war that occurs between the intellect and our spiritual voice telling us, you know, this is what you should do. Aaron ultimately listened to his spiritual voice, and he evolved and he found his spiritual strength. And the scripture goes on to say, it is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. The three peaks of Mount Hermon represent the Trinity of mind, idea, and expression in us. And Zion represents that place where high holy thoughts and ideals live, our spiritual consciousness. So, summing up this scripture, when we live in unity with our brothers and sisters, it is like a precious oil falling all around us, comforting us. Humanity evolves as Aaron did. The collective consciousness evolves from being focused on the intellect to the higher vibrational plane of the spiritual consciousness, climbing the mountain together toward the common good of humankind, reaching the peaks of Mount Hermon and Mount Zion, the union of the Trinity, the highest state of spiritual consciousness, where high holy thoughts and ideals live. The last verse of the 133rd Psalm says, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. When we unify, we are stronger, blending together to create a higher vibrational frequency for humankind, evolving together in a higher state of consciousness, weaving us together in unity and love. Namaste.